set the recording.
Well, okay, we're getting the last few folks coming in. So I think we have everybody across the line now. So welcome to the 60th webinar on the Secret Doctrine, and congrats on finishing 5 years of Secret Doctrine webinars. As you know by now, this webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheading Moria Federation Webinars, then Webinar Series in Progress. All episodes of this, the Secret Teaching and the Treatise on Cosmic Fire series, are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar series you'd like to view. You can register for any of these webinars on the homepage of Moria Federation. Okay, this month in our reading of Old Diary Leaves, HPB called you Upasika by her master, that's her name, has a vision of how her magnum opus, the Secret Doctrine, was going to unfold. But then when she had that vision, then she fell gravely ill, like deathly ill. Can we get a reader, please?
I'll start. Mr. Leadbeater, who had at that time all his great spiritual enlightenment ahead of him, sleeping on a sharpai in the same room as I, heard two voices and saw a column of light by my bedside, but could not distinguish the form of my visitor. On the following night, as my diary entry states, HPB got from her teacher the plan for her secret doctrine, and it is excellent. Meanwhile, the accumulation of materials for the book had long been going on. It will be news to some that this was not originally intended to be a new book, but only a recasting and amplification of Isis Unveiled, with the late T. Subaru as co-editor. As first advertised in the Theosophist, it was to have been issued in monthly parts of 77 pages each and to have run to about 20 parts. This new scheme, given her by her teacher, changed this program, and the gradual building up of the present grand work was the result.
Okay, new reader.
Karen, can you read that?
At 1:27 a.m. in the following night, I was awakened by a telegraph peon who brought me this dispatch from Damodar. Return at once, Upasika, HPB, dangerously ill. It was a thunderclap out of a clear sky. Here were me with two of our vast secret doctrine work not yet even shaped out, the society still staggering under the blow struck by the missionaries. For while we were floating along on the full tide of our co-workers' sympathy, yet outside our ship, to borrow the metaphor, the billows of angry outside hatred and suspicion were swelling and foaming and dashing against it all around. With us together and united, each supplying what the other lacked, and linked together in one intense thought of service to man, there was nothing to fear for the future. Our cause had in the spirit of victory. Our cause had in it the spirit of victory. But with her stricken down, perhaps lying on her deathbed, perhaps doomed to die before I could get back to receive her last word and close her eyes, how heavy my heart was needs no seventh son of a seventh son to comprehend.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Next.
Kirsten, can you read that, please? I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you, Kirsten.
Oh, sorry, I had muted myself. No wonder I wrote in my diary when the ship was running through a silvery sea, my poor chum, and is thy life of adventure, of anguish, of violent contrasts, and of
Unswerving.
unswerving devotion to humanity ended. Alas, my loss will be greater than if thou hadst been wife, or sweetheart, or sister. But now must I carry alone the immense burden of this responsibility with which the holy ones have charged us. We reached Madras at 4 p.m. on the 5th of February. I hurried home and found HPB in a state between life and death, with congestion of the kidneys, rheumatic gout, and an alarming loss of vitality. Added to this, an enfeebled action of the heart had brought her to a crisis where her life trembled in the balance. She was so delighted to see me that she put her arms around my neck as I came to her bedside and wept on my breast. I was unspeakably glad to be there, at least bid her farewell and assure her of my steadfastness.
Thank you. Next.
Scott, can you read that, please?
Dr. Franz Hartmann, her attending physician, said it was simply a miracle that she was alive. Our teacher had worked the wonder by coming one night when they were waiting for her last gasp, laying his hand on her and snatching her back from death. Wonderful woman. The same thing happened with her at Philadelphia when Dr. Pancoast told her that her leg must be cut off to save her life. But she was out of the house the very next day with her mortifying limb cured. She hung in this state the next 4 days, we at first not knowing whether she would live a year or years or suddenly die. As her strength improved, we talked over the situation, and she rejoiced at my promise of undying loyalty to the cause we represented. While we two were talking, HPB got a note from our guru in a phenomenal way, saying that she might assure Subaru and Damodar that her dying, the link between the Theosophical Society and the Master should remain unbroken, a promise which has been amply fulfilled.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, before we get into the text, a quick announcement. From now on, we'll be skipping all the long pauses. Here, let me turn on my video for a sec. All the long pauses that reference 19th century science. HPB had a mission that was relevant, especially to our initial readers, which was to contrast the science of her day with occultism, the better to understand the latter. But since that science is now largely outdated, it seems to me that our time is better spent focusing on her occult writing. So if you see that we're skipping a paragraph or a footnote, that's why. That will always be the content of that which we skip. Okay, last month we saw in verse 3, stanza 6, a blueprint of the great involutionary sweep that brought the subplanes of the cosmic physical planes, as well as the planets, into existence. Then in verse 4, we once again took up a study of Fohat, Rudra among the Hindus, as the sevenfold electrical agent of manifestation. We are, excuse me, we are currently in the middle of HPB's commentary on verse 4, but let's back up just a bit to regain our context. The last sentence of this passage follows a description of the many supersensuous substances that Fohat has created. Quote, electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, cohesion, etc. Followed by, quote, the reader must bear in mind that according to our teaching, which regards this phenomenal universe as a great illusion, the nearer a body is to the unknown substance, the more it approaches reality as being removed the farther from this world of Maya. So, the Fohatic forces of the cosmic physical subplanes are, as we move up through them, progressively less Mayavic and more imbued with reality. And this brings us to where we left off. Could we get a reader?
Greg, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Hopefully I can make this a little more.
Oh, sure. Therefore, though the molecular constitution of their
Okay,
bodies.
hold it. We're getting an echo here.
Are you able to hear me? It's Fred.
I can
me?
hear you. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to read it then, if that's okay. Therefore, through the molecular constitution of their bodies is not deducible from their manifestations on this plane of consciousness. They nevertheless, from the standpoint of the adept occultist, possess a distinctive objective, if not material structure, in the relatively nominal as opposed to the phenomenal universe. Men of science may term them force or forces generated by matter or modes of its motion, if they will. Occultism sees in the effect elemental forces and in the direct causes producing them in the intelligent divine wisdom.
Work.
The intimate those elementals guided by the unerring hand of the root. Their correlation might call it with the elements of pure matter results in our terrestrial phenomena such as light, heat, magnetism, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you. Who just read?
That was
Fred.
Fred.
I thought,
Yeah.
so. Okay, yeah, because I thought you called on Greg, but Greg, we'll get you in a sec. Okay, so first up, a comment on the nature of substance, contrasting the term objective, which applies to the entire cosmic physical plane, and the term material, which refers only to the physical subplane of the cosmic physical plane. These two terms are very loosely used. You also can throw in the term substantive, and they're used in such a way that you can't really pinpoint what is necessarily meant. But in this case, she definitely means that the objective applies to all the cosmic physical plane and the material to the visible. Okay, so thus it follows that even the most tenuous forms have a molecular composition or an atomic / molecular composition, the atoms and molecules being composed of the substance of the plane that they inhabit. Any thoughts or questions about this? By the way, you can ask a question or make a comment anytime during the webinar, and you don't have to wait for me to ask. So next we have, men of science may term them force or forces generated by matter or, quote, modes of motion, if they will. Occultism sees in the effects elemental forces, and in the direct causes producing them, intelligent divine workmen. Indeed, science labels electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, and cohesion as, quote, forces generated by matter or modes of its motion without recognizing that they are produced by a subset of Davic beings called elementals. TCF gives us more detail on this idea. Can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, Greg, please.
Okay.
You're good.
I think we're all good then. All right. So, in terms of that, it's also interesting to note that if in Blavatsky's interpretation of the material versus the objective, in her description of them as you were describing, Francis, yes, the material world, the visible world that we see is only barely 5% of the entire expression with our eyes. That's just something to keep in mind, so people just remember that. And maybe that's why she's emphasizing this. But anyway, so the elemental groups of the dense physical plane who are swept into activity by the builders are three in number: the gaseous elementals, the liquid elementals, the strictly dense elementals. One group concerns itself with the fiery channels, with the fires of the human body, and with the different gases to be found within the human periphery. Another group is to be seen working in connection with the circulatory system and with all the liquids, juices, and waters of the body, whilst the third is largely involved in the construction of the frame through the right apportioning of the minerals and chemicals. From Treatise in Cosmic Fire,
Thanks.
944 to 5.
Yeah, you don't have to read these assignations, but thank you. Okay, we can little.
Okay, Robert has his hand up.
Hey, Robert, what's up?
I just want to say that for me individually, the old science that she is attacking has so many similarities to new science on a kind of materialistic conceptual level, although obviously many of the details of the technologies are different, that I will really miss that. So I hope we can sort of stay open to, not
Okay.
jump,
Yeah, I hear you, Robert. It was a hard decision for me to make. And in occasional reference, like for instance, the paragraph we just read, which, men of science may term them force or forces, I don't strip out every reference, to science, but occasionally she goes on and on. Like I pulled a 2-page footnote out, and it mostly was about 19th century astronomy, and the number of moons and why they moved and the way they moved, and it's just
Okay.
outdated,
Okay, so maybe you'll do, like you say, you'll find a balance between
Now,
stripping
what
out.
I will do is, if it's relevant to, first of all, I appreciate your comments, because like I said, we've gone this far reading absolutely every word, literally every word. And if it has relevance to the occult teachings, for instance, there's instances of that in this webinar series, where we talk about Keeley, who was a scientist, and of course he's included for that reason. And I'll just have to use my discretion in that. But see, here's the deal: unless everybody here plans to live 120 years, we're not going to be able to finish our great quest, to get
But
through
we're
that.
still,
So
we'll finish it in 80 years instead of 120 years. So,
exactly. And
okay.
so, yeah,
I trust your discretion totally. So I just
thanks,
want to
Robert.
say.
And I appreciate what you're saying. Actually, I'm just glad to see you have that much interest. It's terrific. Okay. So moving on here, let me find it. Yeah, so we just looked at this, didn't we? Yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay, next up, the intimate connection of those elementals guided by the unerring hand of the rulers, their correlation, we might call it, with the elements of pure matter results in our terrestrial phenomena, such as light, heat, magnetism, etc. Okay, the quote-unquote rulers are great Phohatic devas who implement the laws of the solar system and who have in their charge denizens of lesser devas who direct the elemental lives, which in turn demonstrate as matter on the physical plane. Okay, can we get a reader for this next? Robert, here's an example. You can read the light gray.
Okay.
What I'm leaving out. Okay. Yeah, reader, please, for the.
Yeah, Robert, please
Okay.
go ahead and read the black for us and the
Don't you
gray for
dare
you.
read the footnote.
Of course, we shall never agree with the American substantialists who want to cut the science out of, excuse me, American substantialists who call every force and energy, whether light, heat, electricity, or cohesion, an entity. For this would be equivalent to calling the noise produced by the rolling of the wheels of a vehicle an entity, thus confusing and identifying that noise with the driver outside and the guiding master intelligence within the vehicle. But we certainly give that name to the drivers and to these guiding intelligences, the ruling Dhyani Chohans, as shown. The elementals, the nature forces, are the acting, though invisible or rather imperceptible, secondary causes, and in themselves the effects of primary causes behind the veil of all terrestrial phenomena.
Okay. First up, of course, we shall never agree with the American substantialist. What's an American substantialist? Well, they are distinct from the European substantialists, I came to find out. And they believe that each phenomenon in and of itself is an entity. Substantialism in general is more in keeping with theosophy, holding that there is a noumenon for all phenomena, but not holding, as do the American substantialists, that every whir and buzz is in itself an entity. Very peculiar. Next, who call every force and energy, whether light, heat, electricity, or cohesion, an entity. For this would be equivalent to calling the noise produced by the rolling of the wheels of a vehicle an entity, thus confusing and identifying that noise with the driver outside and the guiding master intelligence within the vehicle. Fun analogy. The true driver is the manipulator of these forces employed to achieve specific results, as we see in this quote from TCF. This is a quick quote. Can we get a reader?
Trudy, can you read that, please?
The law of magnetic control holds sway.
We can hardly hear you.
Can you turn up a bit, Trudy? Or get close to your mic.
Okay. The law of magnetic controls. Can you hear now?
A little better, but you're still very, very soft.
Holds sway paramountly on the Buddhic plane, and in the development of the control of this law lies hid the control of the personality, but by the monad via the egoic body.
Okay, so you can see why I brought this up as an example. This is using the law of magnetic control in order to develop control of the personality by the ego. So it's a specific use by an entity of a phohatic force. Next, the elementals, the nature forces, are the acting, though invisible, or rather imperceptible, secondary causes. So why secondary? Because they are directed by a primary cause, who is a self-aware Devic or Fohatic being, more directly in line with the will to be of the Logos. Also, I'm just thinking of this now, there's something of self-awareness involved in this. Secondary and elementals are secondary causes because they are not self-aware entities. And it takes a self-directed, self-aware entity to be a primary cause. It's just a thought off the top of my head. Okay. Next, and in themselves, the effects of primary causes behind the veil of all terrestrial phenomena. So they are in themselves the effects of the primary causes. They don't just institute the direction of the primary causes, but they are themselves the effects. And this is because the elementals are the effects they are this because the very substance of these elemental entities makes up the form aspect. They literally weave themselves into the substantive realm. DK gives us more info on this. Could we get a reader?
Yes. Vivian, can you read that for us, please?
I hope you'll be able to hear me okay.
You're
We
perfect.
can hear you fine.
Great. We come now to the consideration of the lesser builders in the three worlds, those who represent the negative aspect of force, being on the involutionary arc, and who are therefore the recipients of energy and influences. They are worked upon by energy, and through the activity of the greater builders are forced into different directions in space, being built into the differing forms. The energy that works upon them, as is well known, emanates from the second aspect, and in their totality, they form the Great Mother. I would call to the attention of all students the fact that these lesser builders are literally a sea of fire, upon which the great breath, or the Aum, takes effect. Each fiery spark or atom becomes, through the action of the word, vitalized with new life and impregnated with a different type of energy. In the union of the life of atomic substance itself with that which causes the atoms to cohere and to form vehicles of some kind or another can be seen demonstrating the Son of God.
Thank you, Vivian. Any thoughts or questions about this?
No, I don't see any, although I'm trying to help Fred troubleshoot, so.
Okay, well, you're the person for that job. Okay, could we get a reader meantime for this segment?
Yes, Michelle, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. Electricity, light, heat, etc., have been aptly termed the ghost or shadow of matter in motion, i.e., supersensuous states of matter whose effects only we are able to cognize. To expand, then, the simile given above, the sensation of light is like the sound of the rolling wheels, a purely phenomenal effect, having no existence outside the observer. The proximate exciting cause of the sensation is comparable to the driver, a supersensuous state of matter in motion, a nature force or elemental. But behind even this stand, just as the owner of the carriage directs the driver from within, the higher and noumenal causes, the intelligences from whose essence radiate these states of mother, generating the countless milliards of elementals or psychic nature spirits, just as every drop of water generates its physical, infinitesimal, infusoria. See God's monads and atoms in part 3.
So I'm sure all of you have drivers. You sit in the back seat and you have a driver in the front seat that drives you around. So this is relevant to you guys. Okay. First up, electricity, light, heat, etc. have been aptly termed the ghost or shadow of matter in motion. That is, supersensuous states of matter whose effects only we are able to cognize. These forces are ghosts or shadows of matter because they influence a denser strata of molecular substance than they themselves belong to. Electricity, light, heat, etc., can influence all those levels beneath their actual form aspect. Next, to expand then the simile given above, the sensation of light is like the sound of the rolling wheels of purely phenomenal effect, having no existence outside the observer. The proximate, exciting cause of the sensation is comparable to the driver, a supersensuous state of matter in motion, a nature force or elemental. Said simply, elementals are the immediate cause of all phohatic phenomena, such as light, heat, cohesion, etc. The immediate cause, that is, they institute the effect. They don't stand in a causal relationship, but they institute that effect. TCF gives us a graphic example of a, quote, supersensuous state of matter in motion, a nature force or elemental. Can we get a reader for this short quote?
Ann Peterson, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Salamanders are those little fire elementals who can be seen dancing in every flame, tending the fires of the heart and the home and of the factory. They are of the same group as the fire, spirits who can be contacted deep in the fiery bowls of the planet.
Thank you. Okay, just an example. Next up, behind even this stand, just as the owner of the carriage directs the driver from within, the higher and noumenal causes, the intelligences from whose essence radiate these states of mother. Okay, elementals are directed by self-conscious devas, who are in turn directed by deva lords, who are in turn directed by still greater phohatic lords such as Agni, Lord of Fire. All these groups of beings are, quote, states of mother because they create and are in themselves, in and of themselves, the component parts of the form aspect. Next, generating the countless milliards of elementals or psychic nature spirits, just as every drop of water generates its physical infinitesimal infusoria. Okay, the term milliard literally means 100 million or a billion. So just as science recognizes molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles, occultism recognizes a hierarchy of elementals made up of an almost infinitely diverse hierarchy of entities. And yet they're the same thing. It's just one understanding sees the life of these beings and the other sees them in their material aspect. DK gives us a fascinating glimpse into the realm of the nature spirits. But before that, shall we answer any?
Yeah, Greg's got his hand up. Go ahead, Greg, please.
Is there any echo?
No, you're good.
Oh, excellent. So this is the way to do it. Okay. I'm currently studying with finishing off with Tuja, and God, I wish she was here because she really brought into some insights this whole concept of the elementals and how they not only affect us um uh in our general world, but they're on every plane. That especially these fiery ones, the uh the Agni Chaitans or whatever, there's Agni Chaitans on the astral, mental, and on at the seventh subplane of every one of these planes. So it's just, I just wish she were here. She might be able to say a whole much more about it, and that science is beginning to move in that direction because we are beginning to see that the elemental life is constantly um, becoming more apparent when we can develop enough of an appreciation and objective understanding of them.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, Tuya, this is her specialty. She has really focused in over the years on all things Davic and the entire line of Davic manifestation, which includes the elementals. And if she were here, she could add a lot to this conversation, no question. Meanwhile, we'll go to DK, who gives us a fascinating glimpse into the realm of the nature spirits. Could we get a reader, please?
Okay. Greg, since your echo is gone, I'd like you to read that, but I just want to put a plug in right now for the Moira Federation and the fact that Tuya has taken, her extensive knowledge, and she has created the Davic classes that go all the way from Quest Universal Level 2 to Quest Universal Level 5. So she's very good with that. So, all right. Sorry about that little commercial. Go ahead, Greg.
No apologies necessary.
Okay. Okay. It is commonly supposed that all the fairies, gnomes, elves, and like nature spirits are to be found solely in etheric matter, but this is not so. They are to be found in bodies of gaseous and liquid substance likewise. But the mistake has arisen for the reason that the basis of all that which can be objectively seen is the etheric structure. And these little busy lives frequently protect their dense physical activities through the agency of glamour and cast a veil over their objective manifestation. When etheric vision is present, then they can be seen, for the glamour, as we understand it, is only a veil over that which is tangible.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, next up, see God's monads and atoms in part 3. The referenced chapter is a 24-page section that begins on page 610 of this volume. Here's a sample paragraph, and it's very relevant to what we're talking about. So this is why I included it. This is why she suggested that we see or look into this section. Could we get a reader, please?
Okay. First, I want to say that Mary has a comment. She says, I wonder what is meant by they have no existence outside of the observer.
Oh, right. Yeah, like for instance, in the case of light, it's because they are a transient effect, and that which projects that effect are actual entities, but the effect itself depends on observation in order for it to exist. It's a questionable assertion, actually, as I'm thinking about it, because we know, for instance, that physical light exists whether there's someone there to observe it or not. It's like the old saying, if the tree falls in a forest and there's nobody there to hear it, is there sound? And that is referencing this idea. So I can't solve this problem for you, but there are two ways to look at it. That an effect depends on observation for its existence, or that the effect is uncoupled from that ability to comprehend. Anybody have any thoughts on that or ideas about that? Any great philosophy majors in the standard philosophies that would, because this is just the kind of thing they love to get into.
She says that's what she thought, and thank you. Okay, can you then read for us, please, Mary?
Yes. To Leibniz, atoms and elements are centers of force, or rather spiritual beings whose very nature is to act. For the elementary particles are not acting mechanically, but from an internal principle. They are incorporeal spirit units, substantial but not immaterial in our sense, inaccessible to all changes from without, and indestructible by any external force. Leibniz monads adds the lecture, differ from atoms in the following particulars, which are very important for us to remember. Otherwise, we shall not be able to see the difference between elementals and mere matter. Atoms are not distinguished from each other. They're qualitatively alike, but one monad differs from every other monad qualitatively, and every one is a peculiar world to itself.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Any thoughts or questions about this? It's sort of leaping into, this whole discussion that doesn't happen for a long time from now, but you can see its relevance to what we're talking about. Okay. Next up, the short read.
I just one more thing on that. You said to welcome comments. So what I was thinking is that in terms of this concept of the elemental energies, anyway, I lost my thoughts. So I'm sorry I interrupted.
That's all right, Greg. No problem. Okay, could we get a reader, please, for this paragraph?
Yes. Tia, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. It is Fohat who guides the transfer of the principles from one planet to the other, from one star to another child star. When a planet dies, its informing principles are transferred to a laya or sleeping center with potential but latent energy in it, which is thus awakened into life and begins to form itself into a new sidereal body. Vide infra, a few theosophical misconceptions, etc.
Okay, thank you. So first up, it is Fohat who guides the transfer of the principles from one planet to the next, from one star to another child star. Indeed, when Fohat withdraws its influence, the force which binds spirit and matter dissipates, and the old form, like our moon, becomes devoid of life. This is followed by a, quote, Fohatic impress of divine thought, as HPB calls it. Then Fohat, quote, crosses gradually on a descending scale all the planes from the noumenon to the lowest phenomenon to bloom finally on the last plane into full objectivity, the acme of illusion or the grossest matter. So Fohat has two functions. He uncouples spirit from matter, and therefore allowing the outer sheath to quote unquote die. And then he recouples the spirit with the new material form, as in the transfer of energy from one planet to the next. Next, when his planet dies, its informing principles are transferred to a laya or sleeping center with potential but latent energy in it, which is thus awakened into life and begins to form itself into a new sidereal body. HPB gives more detail just a few pages from now on this transfer. Could we get a reader, please? And note the illustration too.
Joe, can you read that for us, please?
Did you say Joe?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you. When a planetary chain is in its last round, its globe 1 or A, before finally dying out, sends all its energy and principles into a neutral center of latent force, a Laya center, and thereby informs a new nucleus of undifferentiated substance or matter, that is, calls it into activity or gives it life.
Okay, so we get just a little bit of insight into the process of this transfer. This is going to be we're going to be really focusing in on this subject in just a few pages, because that'll be the main topic of this section coming up. It's kind of an interlude section that HPB put between verses 4 and 5, a 19-page section. Okay, and finally, Vita Infra, a few theosophical misconceptions, etc. Vita Infra just means refer to. The actual title is a few early theosophical misconceptions concerning planets, rounds, and man. A 19-page section coming up in just a few pages. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Kara, can you read that for us, please? Oops. I guess maybe she's gone. Scott, can you read that, please?
The occultists who do not say, if they would express themselves correctly, that matter, but only the substance or essence of matter, is indestructible and eternal, i.e., the root of all, mula prakriti. Assert that all these so-called forces of nature, electricity, magnetism, light, heat, etc., far from being modes of motion of material particles, are in esse, i.e., in their ultimate constitution, the differentiated aspects of that universal motion, which is discussed and explained in the first pages of this volume. When Fohat is said to produce 7 Laya centers, it means that for formative or creative purposes, the great law, theists may call it God, stops, or rather modifies this perpetual motion on 7 invisible points within the area of the manifested universe. Quote, the great breath digs through space 7 holes into Laya to cause them to circumgyrate during Manvantara, unquote, an occult catechism.
Thanks, Scott. All right, first up, occultists do not say that matter, but only the substance or esse of matter is indestructible and eternal. That is the root of all mula prakriti. So I know we've done it before, but I'd like to do a quick review of mula prakriti. When I read it, I found it quite helpful. So could we get a reader, please?
Mula prakriti, Sanskrit, from the mula root plus prakriti, nature, root nature, undifferentiated cosmic substance in its highest form. The abstract substance or essence of what later, through various differentiations, became the prakritis, the various forms of matter, concrete or sublimate. It is pre-cosmic root substance, the root principle of the world stuff. That aspect of Praha Brahman, or space, which underlies all the materially objective planes of universal nature. It is again unmanifested primordial stuff or substance, divine, spiritual, undifferentiated, and therefore indestructible, eternal, parentless, and abstractly the mother, space itself, and the vehicle, lining, or alter ego of Praha Brahman. Mula Prakriti, along with Praha Brahman, are the two aspects of the one universal principle, which is unconditioned to any human conception and similarly eternal. Parabrahman is conditioned and undifferentiated reality, and Mula Prakriti is its veil or inseparable vehicle.
Thanks, Biel. Okay, so without Mula Prakriti, there would be no manifestation. As the noumenon of substance, it is the yin to Parabrahman's yang, and thus composes the first duality. It is indestructible because it is itself the noumenon of all destructive forces. Next up. Occultists assert that all the so-called forces of nature, electricity, magnetism, light, heat, etc., far from being modes of motion of material particles, are in essence the differentiated aspects of that universal motion. Okay, universal motion, also called the great breath, is the, quote, one absolute attribute of what is called in the poem, the one life, of Parabrahman. HPB here tells us that the various forces of nature or aspects of Fohat, such as electricity, magnetism, light, heat, and heat, are differentiations of this universal motion rather than being merely modes of motions of physical particles created at that low level. Next, when Fohat is said to produce 7 Laya centers, it means that for formative or creative purposes, the Great Law modifies its perpetual motion on 7 invisible points. The Great Law is the law of nature, which includes all the laws of manifestation, primary among them being the law of periodicity, all which manifest as and through a septonate of Fohatic energies. I want to make a point here too. Before here, it said at the bottom of this, it says, the great breath takes through space 7 holes in Laya. So, and I just saw this for the first time as we read it through this time, that Laya is unified here. The holes are, the holes in Laya are what initiates manifestation. We have turned this into, and it's, known as 7 Laya centers, but in truth, Laya is a unified, undifferentiated field or 0 point. Okay. All right, so next up, when Fohat is said to produce 7 Laya centers, it means that for formative or creative purposes, the Great Law modifies its perpetual motion on 7 invisible points. The Great Law is the law of nature. Oh, I just read this, I'm sorry. Next up, the great breath digs through space 7 holes in Laya to cause them to circumgyrate during the Manvantara. These 7 holes are in our solar system, have been renamed the 7 Laya centers. Could we get a reader for this definition from De Perucker's called the glossary?
Yes. Karen, I'm going to ask you to read that for us, but first I want to read what Greg typed in the chat. He says, I think my comment was related to how the third ray directs us to a new identification of the fifth ray emerging out of the third ray, along with the fourth, sixth, and seventh rays.
Okay, thanks, Greg.
And then Tia says, interesting how the word Leia is used in various aspects of the teaching.
It is, isn't it? Not least of which is pra-Leia, which is really the ultimate Leia center that Fohat digs 7 holes in, right? It's that state of existence, also often connected with nirvana, and that state of becoming where there is no longer any need to incarnate and to experience any form of manifestation or differentiation. And you can see the connection with the idea of a Leia center. Okay.
Go ahead, please, Karen.
A Leia center is any point in space which, owing to karmic law, suddenly becomes the center of active life, first on a higher plane and later descending into manifestation through and by the Leia centers of the lower planes. In one sense, the Leia center may be conceived of as a channel through which the vitality of the superior spheres pours down into and inbreathes into the lower planes or states of matter, or rather of substance.
Okay, so you can see a divergence in how a Leia center is described. First of all, we have just that state of complete lack of differentiation, which is Leia, right? And then you have these Leia centers, and he says here, suddenly become the center of active life. Well, it creates the arena or the theater for that activity to occur, but it is not itself that active life. You do get, there's subtle differentiation here, but it's important that the energy of Leia itself is inherently undifferentiated. But in this case, it's able to mark out these 7 centers. It's associated with the 7 subplanes of the cosmic physical plane in that way.
Tia says, thank you for that distinction.
Yeah. Okay, next up, could we get a reader?
Yes. Robert, can you read that for us, please? Robert, you're still muted. Maybe he stepped away. Michelle, can you read that, please?
Sure. We have said that Leia is what science may call the 0 point or line, the realm of absolute negativeness, or the one real absolute force, the noumenon of the 7th state of that which we ignorantly call and recognize as force, or again, the noumenon of undifferentiated cosmic substance, which is itself an unreachable and unknowable object to finite perception, the root and basis of all states of objectivity and subjectivity too, the neutral axis, not one of the many aspects, but its center. It may serve to elucidate the meaning if we attempt to imagine a neutral center, the dream of those who would discover perpetual motion. A neutral center is, in one aspect, the limiting point of any given set of senses. Thus, imagine 2 consecutive planes of matter as already formed, each of these corresponding to an appropriate set of perceptive organs.
Okay, yeah, she gets into a fascinating here at the end, but in the beginning, she talks a little more about and distinguishes what a Laya center is. And I think it's helpful, if you think of it as that center point in a which is itself completely non-objective, nonetheless, it's like the point in the center of a circle, and then the field around that point becomes the specific field of manifestation out of that completely undifferentiated Laya point. And that way you can see 7 Laya centers, right? Without losing the true meaning of the term Laya. Okay, first up, we have said that Laya is what science may call the 0 point or line. 0 point here means both no differentiation and no demonstration of force. It is the point of absolute neutrality. Earlier in the Secret Doctrine, HPB describes it as, quote, the point of matter where every differentiation has ceased. Next, the realm of absolute negativeness, or the one real absolute force. So, how can absolute negativeness be the one real force? Because the one is always causal to, and thus the potential of all positive or demonstrated forces. It's a force in pure potential. Next, the realm, the noumenon of the 7th state of that which we ignorantly call and recognize as force. So HPB gives us further insight in her collected works, volume 7, on this idea of 6 forces and a noumenal 7th. Can we get a reader, please?
Vivian, can you read that for us, please?
There are 6 forces in nature. This in Buddhism, as in Brahmanism, whether exoteric or esoteric, and the 7th, the all force or the absolute force, which is the synthesis of all. Nature again, in her constructive activity, strikes the keynote to this classification in more than one way. As stated in the 3rd aphorism of Sankhyakarika of Prakriti, the root and substance of all things, she, Prakriti or nature, is no production, but herself a producer of 7 things, which, produced by her, become all in their turn producers.
Thank you, Vivian. So I hope you're starting to get a sense of this, that this all force, right, the 7th state, which is not itself a demonstrating force, is the force from which Fohat emerges to differentiate on 6 levels, very much like the atomic subplane of a plane, and then the 6 subplanes that demonstrate that particular quality. Okay. And next, or again, the noumenon of undifferentiated cosmic substance, which is itself an unreachable and unknowable object to finite perception. The root and basis of all states of objectivity and subjectivity too. This statement suggests a common origin, which is Mula Prakriti, for both substance and noumenal force, making a strong connection between all force and Mula Prakriti as a common, having that commonality. Next, the neutral axis, not one of the many aspects, but its center. Okay, now the reference to the absolute negative Laya or 0 point, which HPB variously identifies as the noumenon, the 7th state, and absolute force, and also, I might add, Mula Prakriti. Next, it may serve to elucidate the meaning if we attempt to imagine a neutral center, the dream of those who would discover perpetual motion. Okay, she went from the philosophic to something else here. A neutral center means no energetic bias, thus free from the influence of gravity, friction, etc., which on the dense physical plane is theoretically impossible to demonstrate, though many have tried. HPB further describes a neutral center as, quote, the limiting point of any given set of senses. Now here she's going to shift gears a little bit. Here she's giving us a vertical model describing that point wherein particular sensory perception fails to register the more tenuous phenomena of the higher subplanes. And we're going to get into that more in a second. And finally, thus imagine two consecutive planes of matter as already formed, each of these corresponding to an appropriate set of perceptive organs. So we'll implement her suggestion by choosing the sense of taste, and for our two planes, we'll choose the monastic and the Buddhic. Taste demonstrates as discrimination on the mental plane and as intuition on the Buddhic. HPB points out, HPB's point here is that there is a 0 point at the threshold between any two planes. Very fascinating idea. That is at this point completely undifferentiated. It neither participates in the higher activity or the lower. At which point the lesser sense ceases to register phenomena and must metamorphose into the higher sense to perceive the phenomena of the higher plane. Okay, next up. Can we get a reader?
Yes. Joe has a question. So Joe, ask your question, please, and then if you'll read.
I'll do both. I'm in my usual way seeing typically, and I think at the simplest level, one could say what we're reading about right now appears to me to be thesis, antithesis, and the middle point where we're stymied for a while trying to figure out how they blend. And that is pralaya or laya as we experience it in every level of awareness.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, you're giving another example of with thesis and antithesis, which is a positively and a negatively polarized orientation. And then this place in the middle, the 0 point between the two. That's well said. Thank you. And could you read this?
Sure.
Thank you.
We are forced to admit that between these two planes of matter, an incessant circulation takes place. And if we follow the atoms and molecules of, say, the lower in their transformation upward, these will come to a point where they pass altogether beyond the range of the faculties we are using on the lower plane. In fact, to us, the matter of the lower plane there vanishes from our perception into nothing, or rather it passes on to the higher plane, and the state of matter corresponding to such a point of transition must certainly possess special and not readily discoverable properties. Such 7 neutral centers then are produced by Fohat, who, when, as Milton has it, fair foundations are laid whereon to build, quickens matter into activity and evolution.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, so first up, and I'm rereading this stuff on purpose. I could just refer to the statement, but I reread them to, just to bring them more into focus. So if you're hearing a lot of repetition here, it's on purpose. Okay, so we are forced to admit that between these two planes of matter, an incessant circulation takes place. And you know, if we look back here, oops, I just did it to myself. I hit the wrong button and I scrolled all the way to the top of my notes, so I'm going to have to find where I was. Hang on just a second.
Okay. While you do that, Robert's got his hand up.
Good.
Robert.
Save the day, Robert. Go ahead.
The person who mentioned the Pralaya analogy here, this is also a description of death.
Of what?
Of death of the individual.
Okay, could you say a little more?
Yeah, sure. Because that which we see on this plane, as the spirit leaves the body, which is dead, and moves on, then this whole description here, you know, of it vanishing from our perception to nothing, passes to a higher plane, state of marriage, etc., etc. The next paragraph, you know, pretty much. But at the end of this one, comes to a point where they pass altogether beyond the range of the faculties. So when somebody dies, that is when all this stuff will relate to our perceptions, because to us they no longer.
Right, right. Yeah, I see your point. I'm wondering if death, though, isn't more equivalent to the antithesis, and it's, you know, it's the yang to the yin, or the yin to the yang, and that some further state, which would be freedom from the need to incarnate altogether, which, you know, some call nirvana and is often related to laya.
Well, that would depend on the level of evolution of the spirit who leaves the body.
Well, of course it would, yeah. But that
But for what it's talking about here, what I'm saying is your average person, we know, we see them, we see their physical, we don't see their spiritual level. But when they die, they're in that spiritual level that moves beyond the range of our faculty.
Yeah, that's indeed. Okay, and thanks for the interlude. I finally found my place. Okay, we are forced to
exist to serve.
I know you do, Robert. So we are forced to admit that between these two planes of matter, an incessant circulation takes place. And if we follow the atoms and molecules of, say, the lower in their transformation upwards, these will come to a point where they pass altogether beyond the range of the faculties we are using on the lower plane. So HPB here gives us an occult description of the evolution of matter as it passes on its way, on its upward journey through the subplanes, and as well as, once again, suggests that our senses specifically developed for and attuned to some specific range of subplanes will at some point no longer be able to collect information about the now higher, more transcendent substance. Any thoughts about this or questions?
We have a hand, but first I'd like to read what Vivian says. She says, I've been thinking that while we encounter these concepts and thoughts, it changes us needfully. However, we need to come back to what we understand experientially.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, maybe that's one of the reasons we're all here. Yeah, and somebody else?
Yes, we have two hands. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering, maybe I'm just tripping here, but I'm wondering, as in the lower level, the elemental sees existing. Sorry about that. The elemental sees existing when not observed. On the higher level, we're the ones who sees existing. Maybe when they're not observing us. I don't know. I saw that.
Wow.
Almost like that. Right, that repeating itself in different layers.
Well, you know, that's a great comment. You get back to the idea of the great illusion. It all belongs to the great illusion, right? So, you know, when you have that as your fundamental premise, then absolutely we right along with that flash of light or the whirring of a wheel or, whatever phenomena is being produced by these elementals, that it's all illusion. It doesn't actually exist, exist with a capital E. And, as long as we take ourselves as being existent, well, what level are you looking at? But if we think of our personalities as existent, then light and all those properties of sound and flashes and words, they're all existent. They're all just as illusorily, if that's a word, existent to us. But when we transcend to our more essential self, we see all the phenomenon that we have transcended. I'm talking about monadic awareness now, as being non-existent, right? That is, of having no actual true existence. So I love that comment. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
And then, I thought I saw Greg's hand go up, but then it went down. Did you have a question, Greg?
Well, I did, but I keep on, you guys bring me up to this really, really high place, and I can't seem to get myself back when I have an insight. But then I realize, okay, I'm sure it'll get catched up by it'll be, the thought form will be caught by someone else, and then it'll start to permeate and shift again, and then we'll all be on the same page again. I just get these little things. So sorry about that.
I don't think anyone else has ever expressed their inner dialogue quite as clearly as that. Anyone else?
Tia says, Leia is Sanskrit word that may be translated into English as either extinction, absorption, or dissolution. And she got that from Yogapedia.
Oh, sounds like a good source. But do you see that it also is from the perspective of one who is, in life, of someone who is manifest? Then it seems like extinction, right? But from the place of reality, all capitals, it is life itself, or the theater of life itself. The place where nothing but life exists. The at one-ment of all, right? So naturally, that looks like extinction. This is a quality of the first ray. It's both the ray of the destroyer and the ray of absolute deity, and they're the same. It's all perspective. Okay. Anyone else? Is that it?
That's all I see.
Okay. All right. Let me see where we are here. Okay. Robert's gonna. I think Robert has his hand up there.
Just before we leave this stuff, which is so interesting, just building a little bit on what we were talking about earlier. If you're in the room and I'm in the room, I see you because I can see your dense, liquid, and gaseous self. But when that body dies, I cannot see the energies, the states of matter, whether you're in your astral or whatever it is in post-death state. And so the Leia state would be that moment of death where
I see your point. Yeah.
So it's interesting stuff.
That, and that follows the definition just given, a point of extinction. Of the lack of demonstration, you could even say, because extinction suggests something that is not quite right, which means that the being itself is gone. And that's not quite the being.
but the person who read the definition, it was extinction, absorption, or dissolution. You know, that's what's so great about Sanskrit. All those things,
Yeah, and
perfectly described. You know,
that's right. And each one of those is suggests a different perspective of the same
yeah.
phenomena. Indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. I see
And
Joe.
then Joe has her hand up. Go ahead, Joe.
Partially in answer to what Robert was speaking of, I believe that as we move from one thought, a thesis to an antithesis, I'll stick with that thought. But as we move into the neutrality position and then eventually move ahead or give it up, there in that point is the death factor. Any little crises, anything at all that we face is the point where it can be destruction, or it can be just letting go and not bothering anymore. And that to me extends to the larger crises that an disciple would face on the path, where we meet those periods of initiation, when we move through those phases of great difficulty, and then we move ahead again.
Yeah, Joe, that's great. And it also makes it way more practical. You know, it doesn't have to be the final and total absorption of the entire universe in order to experience a kind of Laya awareness, you know, that you can, it's a point of transition where you've reached a point of complete neutrality, which then has within that point all the potential for the next stage to unfold. You're no longer held back or hindered by the previous stage, right? And that, as you say, that's, you know, that happens with every initiation. You know, you know, there's what were the three? Extinguished, absorbed, and what was the third one?
Dissolution.
Dissolution, absorption, and what?
Extinction,
Extinction, just
absorption, and dissolution.
okay. Well, I see the first and the third is similar, though not identical. But you can see that happens, you know, in every major shift, including from, you know, in the taking of an initiation, that I bet there is a Laya point from.
Yeah, it's when they zap you with the rod of power.
I'm sorry?
It's when they zap you with the rod of power.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It would be from that point, you know, you have absorbed and are demonstrating a kind of Laya of that which you've just been through. You know, they say, for instance, you take the second initiation before you actually are initiated, you know, that you actually have already achieved the initiation. That's the absorption. And then there's that point of initiation, which is at the Laya between the two. It's just a hypothesis, but I think, Joe, you have something with that.
I would add that I keep looking at the atoms, and I do know, I guess, that the etheric is definitely impacted. You know, I suspect it goes through our entire system on each one of these small or large crises that, you know, we keep making a little bit of shift in every Laya.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all impacted by that. You're right. It takes on the vibration of the new phase, you could say.
Yeah, I'm eager to see how she connects the atoms to the master plan.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's find out.
Okay.
You've
No way.
generated lots of discussion here. Okay, Tia says, Leia as absorption definitely speaks to the evolutionary process. And then she goes on to say, as well as dissolution, depending upon where consciousness and perception is.
Exactly. Well said. Well summed up, indeed. And, yeah, well said. Okay, anybody else?
I think that's all we've got right this minute.
All right. Next up. In fact, to us, the matter of the lower plane there vanishes from our perception into nothing. Or rather, it passes on to the higher plane, and the state of matter corresponding to such a point of transition must certainly possess special and not readily discoverable properties. Wow, she really gets out there with this one. Okay, we can get at least some idea of this concept by considering the senses on the different subplanes of the cosmic physical plane as given in a treatise on cosmic fire. Again, we'll single out the mental plane. You want to take, okay. Whereon the sense of taste demonstrates as discrimination, defined by DK, as the ability to distinguish the different vibratory qualities of those beings that inhabit that plane, such as one's soul, the mental body of one's master, one's ashram, etc. But on the Buddhic plane, the sense of discrimination no longer provides a means of perception. In order to experience the phenomena of this higher plane, at least in terms of the sense of taste, the intuition, described by DK as direct knowing, must be developed. All five senses metamorphose in this way. But, I didn't address what I thought was the most fascinating point she made. Let's see if it can make any sense. To such a point of transition, and she's talking about this point right at the 0 point between the two, must certainly matter corresponding to such a point of transition, must certainly possess special and not readily discoverable properties. So what she's saying here, it's not of the Adi subplane of the mental plane. That's not of that matter. And it's not yet of the 7th subplane of the Buddhic. I've never seen this talked about or described before. And I wouldn't have even put forward the idea that there is matter at this 0 point, but she makes an interesting point here. Certainly not readily discoverable. We have no charts, or any discussion that I know of about this point. I have to look in Secret Doctrine dialogues and see if one of the boys brings up this idea. But interesting, huh? Okay, let's see now. The reverse of this upward transformation would also seem to be true. In Light of the Soul, DK describes how when a master contacts a disciple on the planes of human endeavor, that master must reinvigorate the lower senses, which he doesn't ordinarily use on his own plane, in order to communicate in the realms of human endeavor. So, when you're focused and based on the intuitional levels, and you need to communicate with the disciple on these levels, you have to make this downward shift and reinvigorate these senses in order to do that. Okay, next up. Such 7 neutral centers, then, are produced by Fohat, who, when, as Milton has it, fair foundations are laid whereon to build, quickens matter into activity and evolution. HB is equating these 7 neutral centers with the fohatically differentiated subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. Milton's quote-unquote foundations references these Laya centers. Could we get a reader for the footnote, which references the term 7 neutral centers?
Such, we believe, is the name applied by Mr. Keeley of Philadelphia, the inventor of the famous motor, destined, as his admirers have hoped, to revolutionize a motor power of the world, to what he again calls the etheric centers.
Okay, so we can take a minute to give our brain a rest and have a little conversational paragraph. John Keeley, a contemporary of HPB, was an American inventor who claimed to have discovered a new motive power described as etheric force based on vibratory sympathy, by which he produced what he called, and I love this one, interatomic ether from water and air. That would be Buddhic to astral. Modern science dismisses Keeley's work, of course, whereas occultists tend to embrace it. No functional machine ever made it out of his laboratory that we know of, though some say this was because his work was sabotaged. There have been a number of publications on Keeley, quite a number actually. I saw Robert's hand.
Yes. Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, this is what we were just talking about before. These Laya centers are everywhere, wherever there's a transformation point of one state of matter into another. So I think Joe hit it when she mentioned brought in the etheric, relating to what I was saying earlier. When death happens, the spirit is in the etheric vehicle for a greater or lesser amount of time, whatever that means. But so there's that bridge, that gap that that has to be crossed, whether it's in an initiation through the rod of power or death through kind of natural process, whatever. But these life centers are everywhere. They're just, you could probably break down the subplanes into subplanes and find endless, infinite chains of these things.
Yeah, I agree with you. But we have to keep in mind, and we have to keep the perspective that, for instance, everything, all the 7 subplanes of the cosmic physical plane are affected by the force of objective reality, which from the highest perspective is not a pralayic laya center. So these, it's a very useful concept to use, for different stages. If we keep in mind that it's not an ultimate and final 0 point that is being described in any particular Laya center. And that would include the ones that she's giving us, like, for instance, between subplanes, right? That this 0 point, it's a, within the context of the 2 planes is a Laya, but in the context, for instance, of the cosmic mental plane, it is a very active place because it's taking place within the cosmic physical. So it's all relative. And the only true Laya or pralaya, is the universal and final pralaya called the day be with us, when everything is absorbed once again into spirit. So,
of course, maybe even that is relative, but it's just relates to one about whom naught can be said. The fact that it seems because of these chains of being and et cetera, it all depends on the nature of the perceiver, like we were talking about earlier. What can a perceiver perceive? And if a perceiver is limited in one way and expanded in another way, they can choose their perceptions, shift their perceptions the way somebody who's locked in to, say, the material plane can't shift perception. But if somebody like DK, like you just read before, he can reinvigorate a sense that he doesn't usually use. So it's all out there all the time. It's just about the perceiver being able to register what they want to register.
indeed. Yeah, you could say that an adept, being an adept, is the ability to transcend a Laya center,
Yeah, actually, that's right. Not to
what my Laya Center is not PK's Laya Center. And that's what you're saying. I think that's true.
Well, that's a relief. I don't have to be nervous around you.
Well, one man's Laya Center is another man's whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Paul Simon, I think, said something like that. Okay.
And Joe has her hand up.
Yes, Joe.
There it is. I believe that this point, I think maybe it's on your scheme already, but it's the point between intuition and concrete thought, where those two come together in an instant, or it takes months or years.
Yeah, I think both are true. It comes together in an instant after months or years, right?
My thought was a sequential there, where a big issue that you're working with might be with you for a lifetime. Another one might be with you for 3 months before you realize what the response should be, or it resolves itself. Or in daily living, we continually have something happen and maybe we get an idea and we move it into concrete reality pretty quickly.
Yeah, good idea. Good thought. Yeah, and of course that instant getting of it, the 3 months, is after 1,000 lifetimes.
Absolutely.
So it's always a steady progress to come to these shifting points.
Perhaps in those shift points, there is no time in the sense that it wouldn't. It's like earlier, remember HPB commented on people trying to use machines to create perpetual motion. In other words, motion free of any limitation of time or space.
Right. Yeah. A Laya Center is, by its very nature, unconditioned, and therefore it would also be not conditioned by time. But see, this is where you get into relative Laya Centers versus, greater, like the Laya Center between the cosmic physical plane and the cosmic astral plane is going to be a profound threshold, and it's going to have much more of an absolute quality of pralaya than some of the shifts we've been talking about here. But that doesn't negate the fact that there is some layak, to coin a phrase, coin a word, quality between thresholds of all types, including the ones that Joe has been describing. I think that's very interesting because it really makes it a usable and useful concept, not just a high philosophical concept, So, okay, let's see, we were here. Yeah. We just have a few minutes, but I think we can go ahead, read this. Can we get a reader?
Yes. Mary, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. The primordial atom cannot be multiplied either in its pregenetic state,
pregenetic
state, or its primogeneity. Therefore, it is called sum total, figuratively, of course, of that sum total is boundless. See addendum to this book. That which is the abyss of nothingness to the physicist who knows only the world of visible causes and effects is the boundless space of the divine plenum to the occultist. Among many other objections to the doctrine of an endless evolution and re-involution or reabsorption of the cosmos, a process which, according to the Brahminical and esoteric doctrine, is without a beginning or an end. The occultist is told that it cannot be, since by all the admissions of modern scientific philosophy, it is a necessity of nature to run down If the tendency of nature to run down is to be considered so forcible an objection to occult cosmogony, how, we may ask, do your positivists and free thinkers and scientists account for the phalanx around us of active stellar systems?
Thank you.
Hmm.
First up, the primordial atom, Anu, cannot be multiplied either in its pregenetic state or its primogeneity. Therefore, it is called sum total. Figuratively, of course, as that sum total is boundless. Okay, primogeneity means firstborn. This quote from later in the Secret Doctrine gives us further insight into Anu, or this primordial atom, called by HPB the primordial atom, anticipating her. I'll read this because I somewhat practice the Sanskrit terms that are a little hairy otherwise. If we turn to Chaldea, we find in it Anu, the concealed deity, the one, whose name, moreover, shows it to be of Sanskrit origin. Anu, which means in Sanskrit atom, Aniyamsam, Aniyasam, smallest of the small, is the name of Parabrahm in the Vedantic philosophy. Parabrahm being described as smaller than the smallest atom and greater than the greatest sphere or universe. Anagraniyam and Mahatorvavat. So, perhaps by describing Anu as both smaller than the smallest atom and greater than the greatest sphere or universe, the ancients were hinting at a blind, namely that Anu, who is one with Parabrahm, stands in a causal relation to all size, to all manifested space. Next, that which is the abyss of nothingness to the physicist who knows only the world of visible causes and effects is the boundless space of the divine plenum to the occultist. This statement reveals the opposite views of science and occultism on the nature of space. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Yes. Robert, you want to go ahead and read that for us, please?
Plenum, Latin, full, fullness, as opposed to void or so-called empty space. The plenitude of fullness of matter in space, which in fact forms space. Space in this sense is a plenum or pleroma, not a vacuum. Yet philosophically, because of the nature of Maya, all manifested existence is illusory and hence empty in the mystical sense. Therefore, those great systems of thought which have remained most faithful to the ancient wisdom, such as Northern Buddhism, speak of space and all the vast variety of existence as sunyata, the void.
Thanks, Robert. Okay.
You know, what's really interesting here is relative to what we were saying earlier about the old science. I think one of the things, and I'm not arguing to try to change the policy, I'm just saying one of the things that's interesting to me about the old science is it shows how transitory science was and is and continues to be, because it is humbled by some of how wacky some of its old ideas sound now when we moved on. And yet this very thing that we just read before, 150 years later, is exactly about, they would be still saying, I don't remember the exact language of the last page, but they're saying the same thing about,
oh yeah, right, yeah, here. Right, the difference between science here, world of visible causes. Yeah, science hasn't evolved from its materiality much at all. In fact, you could say in some ways it's gone backwards because, science of the 1900s recognized ether. HPB often talked about how, sciences were working with ether. Well, you don't find that anymore. There's not any, there's just no one in the pure science discipline who is doing that. I want to make a comment about this last. It says, Therefore, those great systems of thought which have remained most faithful to the ancient wisdom, such as Northern Buddhism, speak of space in all the vast variety of existence as sunyata, the void. Well, sunyata is not the scientific void of nothingness, but rather a reference to and a name for the illusory nature of form, of which space is the noumenal nurture. So it's the void because it's the great illusion, rather than the scientific understanding of the void of nothingness. And that, my friends, takes us to the end of our session. Thanks very much. Very good animated conversation. I really enjoyed that. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's what it's all about. You can all pull Secret Doctrine off your shelves yourself and read the material, but it's in this group discussion that we really get some insights, further insights than what we can get on our own. So with that, some announcements we actually have a little bit of a break. I think our next meeting isn't until Treatise on Cosmic Fire 2 weeks from this last Friday. Is that right, BL?
Yeah, our next, this one, our next Secret Doctrine is November 20th. And that's because we have 5 weekends in October.
Right.
And we're used to 4. So it'll be on the next Secret Doctrine will be 20 November, and it's going to be at 8 p.m. GMT. So that's changing. The next Secret Teaching of All Ages is going to be the 6th of November, and that will also be at 8 p.m. And then your Treatise on Cosmic Fire, the next one for that is, those are the second, it will be the 28th, right?
Right.
The 28th of October
Yeah.
at 5 p.m., right?
Yeah. Yeah, usually we have, roughly a webinar a week. But sometimes because there's five weekends, it shifts things around. And that happened where we have 2 webinars this weekend and none next weekend. So that happens once in a while. But just, if nothing else, go to moriafederation.com and you can always keep apprised of when the next one is happening. And if you're not involved in the other webinars, I know most of you are, I believe, but I strongly recommend it. There's a lot of connective tissue between, you find that the material of one webinar very much is very useful in understanding others. So thank you all, and I'll see you next time.